So I'm not sure where should I stand, here or there? Well, here, yeah. Okay, I think this is better, and uh, it's closer to all of you. So yeah, I'm Melan Satriawan. Uh, I'm the faculty member in the Department of Economics, Universitas Gadjah Mada. Beautiful campus in the uh, very famous city, and I hope you enjoyed the time you're here. So it's not just sitting in the class listening to the lectures, but I hope you also had an opportunity to see around, enjoy the sceneries, the ambience, the culture of Jogja. So, and beside teaching and research in the faculty in the School of Economics and Business, Universitas Gadjah Mada, I'm also helping the government in the policy think tank under the Vice President Office on addressing the poverty issues, as well as advising the Ministry of Finance. What I'm going to talk today in this morning lecture is on the promoting economic and welfare resiliencies in the turbulent time, the role of fiscal policy, something that, partly I have the interest in it, but also I've been doing in the last decade, helping the government to address the issue of poverty in the normal time, but also in the crisis time, protecting the people, using the fiscal policy actually to handle, to cope with the crisis situation in Indonesia particularly. So I'll divide my talk into several parts. So in the introduction, I'm going to ask all of us to flashback a bit in the beginning to 2020, where we all know that was the year when the world was hit by the pandemic. And we'll see how we're also going to discuss on how pandemic led to the crisis. And in the second part, I'm going to discuss about the development challenges faced by Indonesia, focusing on the pre-pandemic period, including poverty, economic growth, the inequality, etc. And then discuss, and we all know that many of those challenges then even worsen during the pandemic through different mechanisms. And then on the third part, I'll talk about how fiscal policy is used to respond to the pandemic, but also to recover the Indonesia economy and to protect the people, particularly the poor and the vulnerables. And then the fourth, I'm going to talk a bit about the efforts of the Indonesia government on developing the inclusive and adaptive social protection, which is all around the world is the main policy instrument to protect the people, their people, in the normal time, but particularly also in the time of the crisis. And I'm going to close talk with some highlights from the talk, and then some step ahead moving forward. So, and we know what really happened in 2020. In Indonesia itself, the pandemic was officially announced, hit the country in March 2020. And this is the shocks that led to the unprecedented crisis. I call it unprecedented because the crisis that caused by the pandemic never happened before, at least never happened in the last 5, 6 decades. The last two crises, Asian financial crisis in 97, 98, and global financial crisis in 2007, 2008, mainly rooted from the financial sectors. Within the source of the crisis were within the economy itself. But the crisis that we faced in 2020, started in 2020, started from the health sectors. Yeah, we know that there was COVID-19, and then so that would be the first things that create the shock, and it hit not just the people but also the economy, because the way, as we know, the way that the virus affect the people, the nature of its infection nature make the people actually to stay at home, to be quarantined, yeah, and not interact with each other, and that somehow actually enforced the government to apply the lockdown measures, and that's the first thing that make the economy actually adversely affected. As we know, due to of the lockdown measures, people cannot work, so they lost their income, they lost their employment, their job, and definitely that reduced actually their purchasing power, that dropped their welfare. But that's only the beginning, because later on it affects the supply side itself. So the business, since the people are required to stay at home, people lost their income, they were no longer able to purchase as much as before. So that really affect also the business entities. That really affect actually the industries. And the business itself not just affected by the domestic demand, the drop of domestic demand, but also the drop in supply side, from particularly when they pre-pandemic actually rely their inputs on the imported things. So this happened both sides. So again, this what make this crisis different than before. In Asian financial crisis, yes, crisis hit the people, hit including the poor and the vulnerables. But one, it doesn't really affect all the people uniformly, because there are some groups in the population that also benefited by the crisis, particularly those those that works in the sectors, or those that have the business in the sectors that demanded by the other countries. So because in the 97, 98 crisis, businesses in Indonesia, we know, suffer from the drop in the exchange rate, the rupiah exchange rate, and in some way it really hit the country. But for the commodities that really needed actually in the international market, their price is getting cheaper, so the demand is increased. So there are some groups, there are some businesses in the country, in Indonesia, that actually boomed during the experience boom during the Asian financial crisis. That didn't happen in the 2020. And we know that this affect globally. If you check the latest data, almost none of the country actually exception from the COVID infection. So all country affected by the pandemic in various degrees. So that in some way concern the country, because they know that they're not going to be able to move or to demand from other countries. So the way that they respond to the pandemic at the beginning is to protect their own resource, to meet their own demand. And that somehow also like propel another hit to the economy, because that creates the disruption in the international supply chains, and that worsened the crisis itself, because it significantly dropped the international trade, the import, the export, and that for countries that rely their products from international market, that cause the shortages in the essentials good, and that lead actually to the inflation. And we know at the end of the story is that then it led to the full-scale crisis, because it caused the recession. Anyone knows the definition of the recession? The economic recession? Anyone want to try? What is the economic recession? No one want to try? So the economic recession, broadly defined as negative economic growth that happen in 2 consecutive quarters. So if a country or the economy experience negative growth in 2 consecutive quarters, then that country or the economy was experiencing the recession. And that happened in many countries. In fact, in majority of the countries, global economic growth experienced negative growth for like 2 or 3 consecutive quarter. Indonesia was no exception. Starting in the 3rd quarter of the 2020, we start to have the negative economy. In fact, actually the 2nd quarter, followed by the 3rd quarter of the 2020, we experienced the negative economic growth. And overall in 2020, in the year of 2020, Indonesia economy was contracted. And that naturally led to the increase of the poverty, increase in inequality. So this is something that you might wonder why increase in, this is 2 different concepts. Later on we'll discuss about briefly about how we define or how we, what is the concept of the poverty and equality. But this is 2 different concepts, but related each other. And usually it is not necessarily go along in the same direction. So there is a that poverty increase and equality increase, but also there is a case that the 2 actually like move in the different direction. But in the pandemic case, the 2 actually happen move in the same direction. So increased poverty followed by or coupled by the increase in inequality. And other than the illness caused by the virus itself, so we also saw some health problems like mental health due to loss of the unemployment, stay at home for the long period, the drop in well-being, and so on. And education also is another sector that adversely affected by the pandemic, because the school were required to conduct their teachings offline, and everyone all around the world are not prepared actually to conduct this online learning, including and it's not just students, even the teachers, even the professor. We are not, yes, we experience like 1-2 in semester actually doing the online learning, doing the online teaching, but we were really actually not prepared to do like the whole semester doing the online teaching or online learning, and that led to the drop in the quality of learning. I think there are already some papers, some studies that start to measure the drop in the quality of learning, and what is the impact and the cost of that the drop in the quality of learning. Also, it caused the disruption in the health delivery, health care system, and overall, this all impact actually in long term will have the adverse impact that we'll see actually in next 5 or 10 years. Yeah, but the good news, at least for Indonesia, but also for other countries. So despite some unprecedented crisis, Indonesia economy shows some resiliencies. By third quarter or by September of 2021, we have seen that Indonesia economy start to rebound. Yeah. So I'll show you the data, the figure later, but that's what really happened. Yeah. And so the question that I'm going to discuss here in this talk is, so what are things that contribute to such economic and welfare resiliencies, yeah, during to escape actually from the crisis caused by the pandemic. But before that, before answering that question, so let me bring you to some of the main development challenges that faced by the Indonesia. So Indonesia, among the country that consider have good performance in economic. Indonesia is among the G20 countries, and by 2050 or even earlier, Indonesia is predicted to become the fourth largest economy in the world. Yeah. Indonesia is also known as the country with robust and consistent growth, and among countries, when countries actually experience like a very a deep negative growth, Indonesia was among the country that not really, well, still affected by the country, because none of the countries in the world actually have the positive, very rare countries in the world experience positive growth during this crisis. But I think what's special about Indonesia is that compared to some neighbor countries, so I think we experience relatively milder contraction. Yeah. But entering the pandemic, yeah. So there are two things that I think we saw in Indonesian growth. One is, yes, of course, we experienced the recession. There's like 3 quarters where we experience negative growth. So that's the reasons why we said that Indonesia experienced the recession itself, like just like other countries. But also this graph, particularly on comparing this left and the right graph, shows that Indonesia economy growth entering the pandemic becoming less inclusive. So what does it mean by the less inclusive? So this come from, so ideally when we talk about the economy, we would like to have the what we call as the inclusive growth, meaning that the contribution to this economic growth should come from all the distribution, all the people in the population. The exclusive or the non-inclusive economic growth, meaning that the economic growth were only contributed by the small or some a small group within the economy, and that is not good, because when you have the high growth but the high economic growth, but you don't that the economic growth is really inclusive, then usually it will be coupled by the 2 issues at least. One, that it's going to be coupled by high inequality, because those that enjoy the benefit of the economic growth is only the one that contributed to the economic growth. While the rest that not really contributing significantly to the economic growth, they just enjoy a little bit. They just enjoy very, very small part of the return of this from this economic growth. And so that's the reasons, or that's the explanation why usually that if the economy grew high, but there was like a high inequality, so that's one of the indication that economy the economic growth actually in that country is less inclusive. Second, usually I think many studies shows that the growth, the economic growth that's not really inclusive would not be sustained. So it only happened like in a few years, but after that there's a limit for that group that contributing to this economic growth actually to keep contributing. So what we really want is what you really want actually is to make sure that your economic growth is become more and more inclusive, meaning that all of the segment of the population should contribute to the economy. So the pre-pandemic, if we look at the data, this is from the National Representative Household Survey collected by the Indonesia National Statistical Office. We look this consumption data collected by the National Statistical Office. So on the left, if you can see that, so on the left, if you can see, this is the period of 2018, 2019. Yeah. And so we like sort from the left to the right is the household consumption from the very poor household, from the very bottom distribution to the top distribution on the right. Yeah. And each bar, yeah, in that graph shows the growth of the consumption. We know that I think background, I should say that the Indonesia economic growth mainly the main engine of the main engine of the Indonesia economic growth is the consumption. So the contribution of the consumption within the Indonesia economic growth is very strong. Yeah. And I think that what really happened to different situation, crisis, when Indonesia was hit by the crisis, why Indonesia economy actually still relatively perform well, because we rely a lot actually on the domestic consumption. So it is unlike the Singapore, that their economy actually rely more on the international trade, yeah, export, import, services. So when the country was hit by the crisis, just like what happened during the pandemic, so Singapore experienced very, very severe adverse impact. Yeah. But Indonesia, yes, we rely, our economy, part of our economy actually rely on the international trade, on the global supply chains, but another part of the economy actually rely on domestic consumption, and that's what I'm going to show you here. So on the right, on the left side, pre-pandemic 2018, 2019. So we saw that the group that contribute a lot actually to the economy is on the left. Yeah. So the left, the more left the group, which is actually the less, the lower level actually of the welfare of the people, they contribute more to the economic growth through their consumption. And this is like a bottom 40% or bottom 5%. Yeah, if you see, until like middle group, middle income or middle distribution, like 70%, they're still above they're still above that red line, which indicate the average growth. So this is very robust growth, because the majority of the people contribute like significantly to the economic growth through their consumption. But the situation was shifted when pandemic hit. So if you see that, so in the left side, the average growth of consumption is like above to 5%, yeah, 4 point something percent, and up to like a 70% population, yeah, from the bottom, they contribute actually above 4 point something percent. But if you look on the left side, on the right side, yeah, when pandemic hit, so this is comparing the 21 relative to the 20. So after the pandemic hit, so the contribution of this group, yeah, those that used to contribute a lot to the economy, was significantly lower, yeah, and even below the average. Those that contribute a lot, those that contribute significantly to the economy, were among the like a top 10 or 8% of the population. So that indication that the economy was getting less inclusive, and that's something that we don't really happen, or at least if that already happened, we don't that actually happening in the very long term. Yeah, we want this actually to return to the situation, to the pre-pandemic, as shown by the left graph. Yeah. Another issue, and that is the inequality, and that explained by this is explained by the previous situation, where consumption dropped, and particularly is what more severely experienced by the lower middle income group. Yeah. While the top income group actually experienced the jump in the consumption. As you can see, Indonesia, at least compared to the Latin American countries, are the country that relatively have better inequality situation. Yeah, Brazil, Argentina, Chile are among the countries in the Latin America that perform very well in their economic growth, but also they have like a high inequality. Indonesia, even compared to China, so we have relatively equal income distribution. But entering the pandemic, as you can see this period, yeah. So we saw some increase in the Gini ratio that indicate the increase in inequality. Yeah. So this is mainly driven by the increase in inequality in the urban areas. Yeah, I think that's natural, because COVID, the pandemic, hit more severely to the urban areas. Unemployment, the lockdown really happened, or more happened in the urban areas, yeah, rather than rural areas, and that's what really explains why Gini ratio inequality spike or increase higher than in urban areas compared to the rural areas. Yeah. It slightly decreased, but then it went up again in the urban areas particularly. Yeah. By the way, feel free to jump in with a question or comments. If you don't need to wait until the end of the presentation to ask the question, but if you have some some comments or some things that you want to clarify, any points or any things from my explanation that you want for further explanation and exploration, feel free to just raise your hand. Okay, next is the poverty. So Indonesia actually compared to other countries perform well in the poverty alleviation. If we look even from the 1970 up to now, Indonesia performed very well, managed to overall maintain the decline trend in the economy, the poverty alleviation. Yeah, but as you can see from the shape, from the slope of this trend, we saw some like two episodes of the success. One is the period from 1970 to right before Asian financial crisis in 1996, where the drop or the decline of the poverty rate was quite significant, from around 60% to around like you can see like 17%. Yeah. Then the declining trend was interrupted by the Asian financial crisis, 97-98. Yeah, the poverty rate increased to around 24%. And after Indonesia recovered from Asian financial crisis in early 2000, Indonesia managed returning the poverty rate declining trend back on track, except for what happened in around 2006, the beginning of the global financial crisis, that coupled with the domestic event, which was the fuel subsidy cut that caused the high inflation during that period, and it hurts the poor. So number of poor, the poverty rate as well increased during that time. But other than that, we managed is actually to keep decrease the poverty rate. Yeah. Although if we compare to the period to the pre-Asian financial crisis period, the speed of the decline, the speed of the poverty decline was much slower than the pre-1996. Yeah, and that's one of the main issues. Well, in one way, in some way, it's natural, because if you have like a lower poverty rate, then the speed of the decline is naturally slower compared to those when you have a much higher level of the poverty line. Yeah. But I think we know that many homeworks, many room to improve in the policy itself that can be done to still make the poverty line drop more significantly compared to before. Yeah. So then again, Indonesia managed to continue the declining trend in the poverty rate until the pandemic hit the country in March 2020, and that's also the time when poverty actually increased. Poverty actually went up again. Yeah, after like almost 15 years keep or stay in the declining trend. And this is many studies by many projection by different agencies, that basically regarding the poverty because of the pandemic. So they predicted that poverty will increase, due to the pandemic. So all of these agencies, none of these agencies actually predict the opposite, or the other way around, So agencies like Semeru Research Institute, Ministry of Finance, Asian Development Bank, Pajajaran University, World Bank, and P2K, they all projected that poverty will increase. The rate of the increase varies, yeah, because I think they use different assumptions. Yes.
How is the poverty rate defined?
The poverty rate?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, good question. So poverty rate in Indonesia, so poverty rate in general was defined as the income or consumption or any measures of the welfare that compared to like a threshold, one particular threshold, what we call as poverty line. So this welfare indicator below this poverty line. So Indonesia use consumption. I think many developed countries use their welfare measures using income. Yeah. We use consumption because we don't have really reliable income data. So National Statistical Office use the consumption instead of income because one of the reasons is because like a 50 to 60% of the Indonesia workers work in the informal sector, so we don't have really official income data. Many developed countries using income data because they have the administrative income data, which much more reliable. So we use consumption data to measure the level of income, and the National Statistical Office also measures the or construct what is called as the poverty line. So poverty line usually consists of the food poverty line and then non-food poverty line. So bottom line is that the food poverty line should be like should be able actually to measure the minimum amount and nutrition that make the individual actually decently live, yeah, according to the standard in that country. Yeah, in Indonesia we use like a calorie approach using the minimum consumption of the Indonesia should be like 2,100 calories. So if you go below that, then from the perspective of the poverty line, food poverty line, so you'll be considered poor. And there's another non-food poverty line that basically you need to spend like minimum amount of your resources on the education, health, housing, etc. Yeah. So again, National Statistical Office has the threshold, that minimum consumption on that non-food, and those two construct what is called as the poverty line. Other countries, in principle, use a similar approach, but of course, there's a different standard. Yeah, in developed countries, you have different minimum requirement to be considered poor, of course. Yeah. World Bank also use like dollar. Used to have like $1 or $2 per day per capita. Yeah. So if you spend like $2, now it's like a $2.15 per day per capita purchasing power parity, then you consider poor if your consumption or your income is below $2.15 purchasing per capita US dollar per day. Yeah. So I hope that clarified the concept of the poverty measurement. Yeah. So this is what the many agencies predict, and that what really happened. Indonesia poverty line is actually increased in 2020, continue in 2021, the early 2021, but the later on in the in the third quarter of 2021, Indonesia poverty rate went back to the declining trend, and that's things that I think we're going to focus in the next part of this presentation. So another thing that I'd like to also bring your attention to the poverty profile of Indonesia, that poverty in Indonesia is getting more explained by the elderly group. Yeah. So like other countries, like other middle income countries, Indonesia is also entering the population population stage as the country that its elderly group higher. Yeah. So is actually the poverty profile. The country is getting age like Indonesia, so I think the population of elderly, those that above 60 in Indonesia, is around like 10 or 12%. Yeah, and it's increasing. It reached like 20% in like 2025, 2050. Yeah, to 20 or 25%. Yeah. So in one hand, it is natural to have the poverty profile that explained by the elderly group, but on another hand, this is also explained by the fact that the Indonesia labor market is dominated by those that work in the informal sectors. So informal sectors in the Indonesia economy is quite dominant. 50 to 60% of the labor market labor force in Indonesia, they work in the informal sectors. So this group of the workers, yes, they are not unemployed, so they work, they have the income, but they don't really contribute. One, they don't really contribute to the country through tax, because country cannot tax this informal sectors usually. So that this is what they usually call as the underground economy. Yeah, because they don't register their businesses. Yeah. So and their businesses sometime on, sometime off. They can easily move to different type of business, etc. Yeah. And the other characters of this informal sectors, once the workers actually can no longer work, or they simply want to, they cannot, have the physical capacity to perform jobs, so they no longer have the income. Yeah, because informal sectors doesn't have the benefit, that they doesn't offer the benefit like the formal sectors. So those that the poor in the elderly group, yeah, they're the one that mostly explained by the group that used to be work in the informal sector. Yeah. So when the informal sectors is actually keep strong or keep dominant in the economy, something inevitably will happen in the future. Yeah. You will have the poverty profile that is explained by the elderly group, and that's something that's really concerning. Another issue is another challenge in Indonesia development is that despite its relatively low poverty rate, because Indonesia is single digit, yeah, slightly back to the double digit in the pandemic period, but it's already went back to the single digit, 9-point-something%. But what is concerning is that those that not considered poor, they actually live not far from the poverty line. This is what we call, yes, they are not poor, but they are still vulnerable. So any type of shocks is, we don't need to talk about like aggregate shocks, yeah, like a pandemic, but any type of shock, idiosyncratic shocks, like the illness or the death of the head of the family, yeah, the harvest failure, yeah, or the bad weather that make actually the business, not able to run. So that make the people can easily back to or can easily fall down under poverty line. So this is very fragile situation. Yeah, you can see from this distribution. So this is the graphs. The top of the graph actually not really in the middle. Yeah, but like tend to be like left skewed, meaning the concentration of the people that not considered poor live on the bottom distribution welfare. Yeah. So yes, they are not poor according to the poverty line, but you're not far from the poverty line. Yeah, you're not far from that threshold. So if anything happened to if there is shocks, or we don't talk about shocks, if anything happened with there is a high inflation because that disruption in the supply side change, and that will move right the poverty line, the threshold. So someone that not experiencing the increase in income, they can be now considered poor. So this is like a very fragile situation, and this is confirmed by the fact that I think that we also saw from the data that the welfare level is so dynamic. Yeah, this is so we look the movement of the welfare of the people in two periods. Yeah, one using the IFLS data in the period of 7 years, but also using SOSENAS just in the period of 1 year. So from this, you can see that people can easily move to different ladder. Yeah, move down or move up. Yeah, and this is the period when we don't really experience the crisis. Yeah, and so there's something other than aggregate crisis that explain why there's some group that really able actually to move the ladder to the upper ladder, but there's also some group of the population that experience worse off in their welfare. Yeah. So this is something this is another challenge. So vulnerability, the fragile situation of welfare that can easily change. Yeah, not necessarily because of the crisis, but because of the very mild idiosyncratic shock. And poverty, the welfare is one main challenge. Another is related with the human capital, with the nutritional status. Indonesia, and not just Indonesia actually, but also some middle income countries, China, India, and some Latin American countries also face this situation. What we call as the double burden nutritional problem. Yeah. So double burden nutritional problem is characterized by the situation where a country still suffer or still experience with the undernutrition problem, like stunting, wasting, malnutrition, yeah, moderate or severe, yeah. But on the other hand, yeah, the country also suffer from the overnutrition problem. So Indonesia is one of the country that experience this double nutrition problem. Yeah, and this is one of the main challenge for Indonesia moving forward. Yeah, how to, on one hand, address this undernutrition problem, stunting. I think we have kind of good news in terms of the country in the last 5 years were able actually to significantly reduce stunting. Yeah, after the stagnant periods up to 2018. But on the other hand, we start also to have the obesity problem, what is called as the overnutrition problem. So we don't want this both actually to really happen. Yeah. So we want to manage them under like a 10%. Yeah. definitely it's hard to have like the 0%. But as long as we can keep like under 10%, so the problem is called like a manageable. Yeah, Indonesia still in 2020 are still above 20%. So that's something that Indonesia need to pay attention seriously on this problem, particularly on stunting. Yeah, and we know that this there's a COVID and pandemic actually worsen under undernutrition through poverty, through increase of the food price due to disruption of the supply chain, through illness itself, through the disruption of the healthcare services, and can also happen like through change in the government priorities. Yeah, pre-pandemic government like pouring so much resources like to address malnutrition problem, but because of the pandemic, then government shift the priorities to like handling the pandemic, recover the economy and so on. Yeah, so this is also something that the government need to pay attention seriously. And education is another issue. Yeah. So in addition to the nutrition problem, that one of the main element for one of the main aspect of the human capital, education is another issue still for Indonesia. And overall, we have like the human capital index that only 0.54. Yeah. Anyone knows what is the human capital index? What the human capital index measure? Who construct this human capital index? Any guess? There is a human development index, but I think the latest one or the more recent one that released is the human capital index. It was released by the World Bank. Yeah, and in this measure, Indonesia is the worst among the Asian 5 countries. Yeah. And I think among the bottom distribution compared to other middle income countries. So what this really measures what human capital index really measures is that a baby who was born in Indonesia, so only reach like 54% of their full potential productivity. Yeah. Compared to if they experience or they receive full potential of the nutrition, of health, and then education. So the human capital index 1, meaning that all the individuals in that country will reach their full potential, yeah, in contributing their resources to the economy. But Indonesia is at the level still in 2020, still at the level of 0.54. Yeah, so just slightly above 50%. Yeah, in one hand, of course, this is like not a good news for Indonesia, because Indonesia is just 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, we just heard that Indonesia now considered as a upper middle income countries. Yeah, but when it comes to this human capital, I think we still comparable to the lower middle income countries, even some of the poor income countries. So their human capital index is actually still around that, still comparable with what Indonesia performs. Yeah. But on the other hand, of course, this is good news. Yeah. On the other side of the token, we know that we can, if even with the 0.4 human capital index, Indonesia already performed relatively well in the economy. Yeah. So if we can push this human capital index and then reach the productivity like in the full scale, yeah, reaching like 0.7 or 0.8, like Singapore, so then we're confident that the economic, that the Indonesia economic will even perform much better. Yeah. Okay. So despite with all of those challenges, and then the pandemic that caused the unprecedented crisis. So what then the government has been doing, yeah, to handle the pandemic, to protect actually to recover the economy and to protect the people, yeah, against the adverse effect of the pandemic. Yeah. So I'm going to focus on the fiscal policy, yes, because of course there's the monetary authority, the central bank, they have their own effort, they have their own policy, yeah, through like interest rate, targeting the inflation, things like that, yeah, or through their money supply, and etc. So we're not going to focus on this. We're going to focus on the fiscal policy. How fiscal policy, yeah, or in the narrow terms is how Indonesia actually, government of Indonesia actually use their budget, to cope with this pandemic, to cope with this crisis, and then recover the economy and protect the people. So first of all, so what is fiscal policy? Yeah. So one of the definition was introduced by Vito Tansi, former chief economist of the IMF. Yeah. That said that fiscal policy is the use of public finance or budget instruments to influence the working of the economic system to maximize economic growth. And it serves the objectives. One is the provision of public good. Second is income redistribution. And third is stabilization and growth that cover internal balance, external balance, and economic growth itself. Yeah. So this is fiscal policy in brief. Yeah. And what is then the role of the fiscal policies? Yeah. Particularly in the crisis time. Yeah. But also in the normal time. Yeah. So fiscal policy basically use the budget to respond to the pandemic by providing financial support and stimulus to the individuals, to the business entities, and then also to the overall economy to help stabilize the economy during downturns, preventing deeper and prolonged recession. So this is basically the role of the the fiscal policy, particularly during the crisis. Yeah. And there's different form of the fiscal policies, how fiscal policy was implemented. For example, so government can use the budget actually to support the healthcare system, testing the population if they get infected by the virus, to expand the vaccination programs, as well as to support the affected industry. It can be used also to provide support to the poor and the vulnerable, giving them the cash transfer, provide the unemployment benefit for the unemployed person, And then support the business entity by giving the business grants, yeah, to deal with the crisis. It can be also manifested or implemented in the forms of the tax relief. So giving the tax relief, tax reduction to the business, because every business like a suffer scale down of their business. So some even not able really to pay their mandatory tax to the government. So government give them like a rescheduling of the tax. So it can be also in the forms of like a tax incentive. So you don't need to pay tax, but you do need to actually to do A, B, C actually to to help stimulate the economy, yeah, and the recovery. And government also can use fiscal policy to boost the economy through like building the infrastructures, including the social infrastructures, yeah, like education infrastructure or health infrastructure, as well as the the physical transportation infrastructure that will help, not just will help the economy through the give like the direct impact of the economy, but because by building the bridge, by building the schools, by building the health facilities, yeah, road, it creates the jobs, and that's something that fiscal policy can create or can generate the multiplier effect actually for the economy, in addition to the direct effect from the infrastructure that was built, yeah. And fiscal policy can be used in the normal time. Usually in the normal period, fiscal policy basically is the main instrument to address the inequality, using like progressive tax, taking more actually from the rich, yeah, from the have, from the top income, and then redistribute to the poor and then the vulnerable, yeah. And the way that the fiscal policy do is by creating their own money, generating their money from the tax. But in the time of crisis, because tax performance or tax collection drop, so one of the source of the money that they can use is actually by borrowing, yeah. So, and that's what the main feature of the fiscal policy, because you need to be, the fiscal policy actually need to be flexible. In the normal time, so you collect the money from domestic, yeah. You finance the development through that money, but when there was need actually to use the external resources, because domestic situation was not for you to collect or to mobilize the money, then you can use actually the borrowing facilities, either from the donors or from the multilateral agencies. And this is so I'm going to like speed up my talk, because hopefully there's time to discussion. So the fiscal policy in Indonesia operate mainly through the budget, what we call as the APBN, Anggaran Pendapatan Belanja Negara. So basically the national state budget, yeah. And it has, according to the law, it has like three function: allocation, distribution, and stabilization. And it basically it rules how the government should mobilize the revenue, yeah, through tax and non-tax sources, but also through other innovative sustainable financing, borrowing domestically or international, but also from private sectors, as well as actually to manage, the principle, the management principle, so that money, that resources can be managed effectively. And on the spending side, then you need to make sure that it used to the sectors or the items that really push the economy, really make the economy, one, moving forward, but also more inclusive. And the others is actually to make sure that it has the strong effect on the human capital improvement. Yeah. I'd like to bring you now on this. So how Indonesia respond to the pandemic using this fiscal policy. Yeah. So there is 3 timeline here. So timeline on the COVID. So I'm just going to be very quick on this, because I think many of you actually know what really happened with the COVID development. That is on the top of this timeline, the very top. And then how then fiscal policy flexibly actually adjust their deficit. Yeah. So and then how it uses actually the money to fund or to support the economic recovery, the national economic recovery. Yeah. But first of all, I'd like to explain a bit about what is called as the budget. Why there was a term of budget deficit. So basically, it's simple concept actually. It's so the budget called deficit when your internal revenue is lower than your spending. Yeah, and that usually happen during the crisis, because the source of the domestic income was dropped, yeah, because of the crisis, like what we experienced during the pandemic. And in that case, then you need to finance that deficit using the external resources, using the borrowing, using the grant, and etc. Yeah. If possible, in the normal time, you use also a borrowing actually from the domestic. But in the COVID, in the pandemic situation, it's not possible. So you mainly actually mobilize the fund to finance the deficit through external or international borrowing. Yeah. And that's what really happened actually during the COVID. Yeah. And if we see, again, I'm just going to be quick on the timeline of the COVID. Indonesia experienced COVID in the firstly on the March 2020. It reached the 100,000 cases in the July 2020, and then the peak is when we have Delta variants in the July, August 2021, and then another peak again happened during February, March 2022. Now, I think the more important figures is on the middle timeline, when we see that how government actually make the budget deficit so flexible, yeah, to respond actually to the needs, to respond to the situation. Yeah. The current regulation set actually the budget deficit should not exceed the 3%. So that's what the current regulation. Other countries usually have different rule on that, but they usually have the similar regulation that set the maximum deficit that the budget of a country can have. Because otherwise, politicians then will use actually if no regulation on the maximum deficit, that politician used to I'd like to have everything free. Then you have the budget, you have the maximum deficit that you cannot afford. Yeah. So here, after So pre-pandemic until the early 2020, so the government managed to have like a less than 2% the budget deficit. Yeah. So that's still according to the law. Yeah. But knowing that the government need to be more aggressive in responding to the crisis, yeah, helping the poor, helping the micro and small enterprises, provide the stimulant for the economy. So definitely government need to spend more on the these needs. Yeah. But of course the money is not there because the tax collection also dropped. So what government do is actually revise the regulation that allow then for the budget to be more than 3%. Yeah. So the new regulation actually allow the government to have like up to like 7 or 7% deficit. And that's what the new regulation did. So allow the government to have the higher deficit. So that regulation then make the government have the flexibility to, borrow from the fund, mobilize the external funding support to finance the deficit. And as you see that the deficit across 2020, 2021, and 2022 is above 3%, something that didn't happen before in the pre-pandemic period. Yeah, I think in terms of the fiscal deficit, we're among the countries that very disciplined, that try to maintain the fiscal credibility. Yeah. And that deficit reflected in how government allocate the budget for the economic recovery program. Yeah. So the spending in the very bottom timeline, the spending is also unprecedented. Yeah. I will focus perhaps on the social protection spending. Yeah. In the normal time, Indonesia only spend like 100 trillion rupiah max, yeah, per year for the social protection program. But during the pandemic period, Indonesia spent like 400 trillion, even more. Yeah. So 5 times bigger than the pre-pandemic period. Yeah, that's actually reflected how the government thinks that, and that I think to many of us, I think that was the right decision. Yeah, to provide the full protection, full support to the poor and the vulnerable and those that affected by the pandemic, including the micro and small and medium enterprises. And that what at the end actually explain why the economic rebound in relatively fast period. Yeah. And this is how the government spend that money, that allocation that was part supported, financed by the external resources. So government used like use the money, that economic budget allocated actually to recover the economy, for health, for social protection, and business support. Yeah. In addition, of course, to those three, the government also used for to vaccination, to the internet package of the students and the teachers, to help continuing the effort to reduce stunting, and to support the tuition fee system. Yeah. And this is a zoom in on the situation on the what the government on the social protection. Yeah. So how government expand the current social protection? We haven't really like ideal social protection system, but so we are reforming many parts of many sites and programs of our social protection, but the pandemics actually forced the government to conduct or to do the reform in accelerated way. And to respond to the pandemic, government expanded some of the existing social protection program to protect better the people, the poor, the vulnerable, and those that affected by the pandemic. Yeah. So programs like the food assistance program, food vouchers, yeah, here what we call as the Kartu, it is expanded from 15 to 18 million. PKH, our CCT program, so is was also expanded. Yeah. And in addition to that, government also introduced some of the new programs. Yeah. Because while the expansion of the current program, yes, will cover the new poor, the new vulnerable individuals, but there are still some other groups that actually need the support from the government, that not eligible not eligible by the current programs. So that's the reasons why the government also introduced some of the new program like Kartu Prakerja, yeah, or pre-employment card, and then the programs like the wage subsidy, and then the capital loan or the capital assistance, yeah, for micro and small enterprises. And that's what really works, actually. We see not in a very long time how the Indonesian economy and the welfare is actually rebounded. From the beginning of the 2020, when we observe the increase, the recession, the negative economic growth, the increase of poverty, increase of inequality, but with all of those efforts, yeah, the increase in the budget, despite of course the increase in the deficit, alongside with the program reforms, that helps the economy actually to be rebounded by September 2021. So relatively faster, at least compared to some neighboring countries. Yeah. So unemployment rate actually dropped to like 8 around like 6 or 5.7 in 2022. Yeah. And then further decreased to 5.5% in 2023. Poverty rate also, even poverty rate actually back to the declining trend in September 2021. Yeah. So after peak to the 10.2% in the September 2022, yeah, in March 2021 it went back to the single digit, and then further decreased in 2022 to 9.6%. And overall of the Indonesian economy also rebound robustly. Indonesia itself not experience actually recession that relatively milder compared to other countries. That shows how the Indonesian economy is relatively more resilient compared to other countries. But also the way that Indonesia and the timing of the Indonesia rebound, the economy of Indonesia rebounded is relatively faster compared to other countries, and that's partly reflect how effective actually the efforts and the policy, the fiscal policy that used by the government to recover the economy and to protect the people. We are also relatively back to the pre-pandemic situation in terms of the contribution of the bottom group of welfare distribution. Yeah. as you can see in the previous slide, where the lower to middle income or lower to middle welfare group, they experience the drop in their consumption growth. But in 2022, relative to 2021, this group, at least until the bottom 40%, they experience actually their consumption actually went up, and their contribution to the economy is actually it's above average. There still need to push. There still need a push actually for improve or to support the middle group. But overall, this is like the right track actually to go back to the pre-pandemic period. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip off this because I know Pak Darno will cover of the social protection in his talk after this session. So I'm not going to cover on this. I think this aligns with what he's going to explain on how social protection, Indonesia social protection, how it helps actually to reduce, to alleviate the poor and help the vulnerable group. So I'm going to skip it and then close our class with some highlights. So one, as we know that during the pandemic, globally, countries actually suffer from health, social, and economic adverse of the pandemic, economic adverse impact of the pandemic, and Indonesia is one of them, definitely. And then countries they respond differently, but one main uniform way for many countries to deal or to address actually to handle the pandemic and address the adverse impact of the pandemic is through like the fiscal policy. And the government of Indonesia, the way of government in Indonesia handle this crisis is like other countries as well, is to curb the infection, cure the sick, provide the incentive to business, support the welfare of the people. I think that are proven to be effectively revive the economy and rebound the people welfare after some significant drop, at least during the 2020 the year of 2020 and the mid of the 2021. And of course, one main policy instrument that is to be effective is the spending, but also the social protection system. And then Indonesia is on the way actually to reform their social protection system. Something that any countries, including Indonesia, will need. Not just in the period of the crisis, but also in the normal periods, because the welfare is so dynamic, even without the aggregate shocks like a pandemic. We don't need like aggregate shocks like pandemic to observe the change in the welfare. Any idiosyncratic shocks can easily change, can easily drop the welfare of the people anywhere. I think I stop my talk here. So apologize for any things that under the expectation. But feel free if there's like a few questions. Happy to respond as much as I can. And then if feel free to, if you think that you prefer to like email to raise to discuss your question through email. Thank you very much. Any question? Yes.
presentation about the impacts or the effects of fiscal policies. It was very good, but I was curious about the corruption index in Indonesia, so I searched for it.
What is index?
The corruption index.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I knew that in 2020 it was dropped down from 38 to 34 out of 100. So 100 is the highest or like very clean, and 0 is highly corrupt. So I want to ask, was there any significant instance during the pandemic wherein corruption affected the, could have been better performance or the results of those fiscal policies?
Yeah, well, good question, very good question. Definitely, yes. Yeah. I think you may be aware that the one of the minister, and this is like the social affair minister that was caught by the corruption committee like 2 years ago. Yeah. And the crime that he committed is that actually he worked with the private sector, the private vendors that deliver, the food that were given to the poor, to the affected household. Yeah. And that definitely reduced the effectiveness of the resources, of the assistance. Yeah. Because he didn't take directly from the public budget, but he conspired with the private vendors that were tasked actually to distribute that food assistance. Yeah. And then it was detected by the corruption committee, and then last year he was indicted, I think, like 12 years jail. Yeah. So, but as you can see, so it's not just, so for one, it's actually its direct effect, it's reduced the amount of the resources that's supposed to be received by the poor. Also, the quality can be better if the assistance, if the resource was not corrupted, right? But this is also like showing some efficiency issues. Yeah. The quality of the implementation issues. So definitely corruption play a major factors in determining the effectiveness of the government support, of the government assistance to the people. Any other question? No? Well, feel free to email me. I think I miss. There's supposed to be E, so E Satriawan. So that this is only my last name, but there is like initial E in front of S. So if you think that you have a question, but because we don't have time, or you think that you think better to reach me by email, feel free to email me. So I think with that, I'd like to thank you for being here and then discussing about this topic, and I wish you the best.